One child whispered into the wind that night, but it was the dog who heard her. A blizzard rolled down from the high country, blanketing the valley in white silence. While the world lay warm behind locked doors, one retired K9 named Max stood alert on the porch of an old cabin, ears twitching, nose lifted to the storm. Somewhere out there, a child was breaking. Somewhere out there, the kind of cry only a mother should hear had been swallowed by snow. No one else heard the words caught in that whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'll be good." But Max did. And what he led his handler, Eli, to that night would change 3 lives forever. A forgotten girl, a grieving soldier, and a dog who refused to forget what duty meant, even off the battlefield. This isn't just a rescue story. This is a story about coming home. Before we begin, the wind clawed down from the mountains like a living thing. It howled through the trees and across the frozen roofs of Fairbend, Montana, a town that barely made the map, but still held tight to its own stubborn rhythm. Street lamps flickered under the weight of snow, casting long, swaying shadows over empty sidewalks. Somewhere, a porch light clicked off. Somewhere else, a window was drawn shut against the storm's fury. But just outside the town's northern edge, past the pines where the streetlights no longer reached, an old cabin stood alone at the lip of the forest, weathered, dark-roofed, and buried knee-deep in snowdrifts. Eli Turner sat on the edge of his bed, the silence around him thick as wool. He was 43, broad-shouldered and lean, with the kind of frame built for war and worn thin by peace. His face was hard-hewn, all bone and lines, an angular jaw dusted with a few days of beard, a thin scar cutting through his left brow like a memory that refused to fade. The light above him was dim, warm, but it couldn't soften the shadows under his eyes, the tight set of his mouth. His right shoulder ached, old surgery, and the cold didn't help. Neither did the dreams. He'd come to the cabin on a medical leave meant for recovery. 6 weeks, they said. Time to heal, to breathe. But for men like Eli, breathing didn't come easy. Not when silence reminded him of firefights. Not when stillness felt like waiting for the next bomb to drop. He reached down and ran his hand across the thick fur of the dog lying at his feet. Max, a retired K9, 10 years old now, but still sharp as a knife. Max was a purebred German shepherd, his coat a mix of charcoal and amber, his ears always alert even in sleep. He had the eyes of a soldier, watchful, calm, and just a little haunted. Max had served beside Eli in Iraq, searched collapsed buildings in Syria, and once took shrapnel shielding Eli from an IED. These days his gait was slower, his right hind leg stiff with age, but his senses? Still unmatched. Eli stood, pulling on a heavy flannel over his t-shirt, then his coat. Outside, snow fell sideways in thick gusts. The storm had crept in faster than expected, and the forecast called for more through the night. He opened the cabin door to check the perimeter, an old habit he couldn't shake, and that's when Max moved. In an instant, the dog was up. He didn't bark, just snapped to attention, nose to the wind, ears pricked, then he bolted. No hesitation. Straight into the white, vanishing down the porch steps and into the woods beyond. "Max!" Eli shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. Without thinking, Eli grabbed his boots, yanked on his gloves, and ran after him. Snow hit him like a slap, blinding, needling his cheeks, filling his lungs with ice. The flashlight in his hand barely cut through the night, but he followed the trail of paw prints, deep and sure, cutting across the hill and down toward the tree line. 10 minutes in, Eli was soaked to the knees. The cold bit through his gloves, the pain in his shoulder flaring with every movement. Still, he pushed on. Max never ran without reason, and this time, it wasn't prey or instinct. It was purpose. He found Max just past the edge of Miller's Park, where the playground lay buried in white. The slide looked like a collapsed spine, hunched under snow, swings frozen midair. Max stood at its base, motionless, ears flat, nose to the ground. Then Eli saw her. A bundle. No, a child. Curled tightly beneath the plastic of the slide, half covered in snow, as if the storm had tried to erase her. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, hair matted to her cheek. Her coat was thin, soaked, and torn at the sleeves, one mitten missing. She wasn't moving. Eli dropped to his knees beside her. Max gave a soft whine and backed a step, as if sensing the gravity of it. "Hey, hey, kid! Can you hear me?" Eli's voice was rough, nearly lost in the wind. The girl stirred, barely. Her lips parted. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I'll be good." That was all. She collapsed back into the snow, breath shallow. Eli didn't wait. He pulled her into his arms. She weighed nearly nothing, and wrapped her in his own coat. Her skin was ice, her heartbeat weak. He looked down at Max. "Go home, boy. Get the door ready," he ordered. Max took off like he understood every word. The return trip was a blur. Snow blurred the trail. Trees swayed like ghosts in the dark. Eli's shoulder screamed with every step, but he didn't stop. The child's breath was the only thing that mattered now. She needed warmth. She needed a chance, and Max had given her one. By the time he reached the cabin, Max was already there, scratching at the door. Eli stumbled inside, laid the girl gently on the old couch near the fire, and began stripping off the soaked layers. He wrapped her in blankets, placed hot water bottles at her sides, rubbed her hands. Max sat nearby, eyes never leaving the girl. Minutes passed, her chest rose, fell, rose again, a little steadier this time. Eli sat back, breath ragged. He looked at Max, who now rested his chin on his paws, ears flicking toward the child. "You found her?" Eli murmured. "You damn old hero." The storm still howled outside, wind lashing the windows. But inside, the cabin was warm. A little girl lay safe. A soldier breathed easier. And Max, the dog who refused to forget his duty, watched over them both. The fire crackled low, throwing soft amber light against the knotty pine walls of the cabin. Outside, the storm continued to scream, but within, time had slowed to a hush. The couch had become a makeshift recovery bed, layered with flannel blankets, an old military sleeping bag, and 2 heated water bottles wrapped in towels. Lily hadn't stirred since Eli laid her down, and for the first hour, he hardly moved himself. Just watched her small chest rise and fall, each breath a minor miracle. Her face was no longer blue, but pale, her lashes stuck together in frozen clumps. Strands of light brown hair clung to her forehead, damp from the melted snow. Her hands were still cold despite the warmth layered around her, but her pulse was steady now. Eli crouched beside her again and gently wiped her forehead with a warm cloth, careful not to wake her. Max lay nearby, curled like a silent sentinel, his golden brown coat barely twitching, though his eyes never left the girl. He hadn't barked once since they returned, just watched, alert, present. Eli finally stood, wincing at the stiffness in his shoulder. The ache reminded him of the mortar blast that tore through his unit 2 years back in Mosul, and the surgery that followed. Metal pins, scar tissue, months of rehab. He walked into the small kitchen, clicked on the kettle, and leaned against the counter, letting his mind drift to her. Grace. His older sister had been fire and stubbornness and laughter before it all went quiet. She had left Fairbend a decade ago and never really came back, not after their parents cut her off for being reckless. When she got pregnant at 19, their father, a retired sheriff and pillar of the town, called her a disgrace. She left town with little more than a canvas bag and a swollen belly. That was the last time Eli had seen her in person. He still remembered the hurt in her eyes, the defiance in her voice. They rode a few times, then even that stopped. Now here he was, with a girl who looked like Grace had at that age. Thin frame, high cheekbones, and those same wide, questioning eyes. The kettle whistled. He poured hot water into a chipped mug and dropped in a peppermint tea bag. It was the only non-caffeinated thing in the cabin, and he needed his hands to hold something. As he turned back toward the living room, he noticed the small notebook lying on the floor beside the couch. It must have fallen from Lily's jacket. Eli walked over, picked it up, and sat slowly in the chair across from her. The notebook was worn, water-damaged along the spine, with pages bent and ink that had bled in the cold. The front read only Lily's notes, in large, uneven block letters. Inside were dozens of pencil sketches, some crude, some surprisingly careful. There was a drawing of a girl alone at a dinner table, a broken chair underneath her. A separate picture showed a woman with angry eyes pointing at a puddle of juice. Page after page told a silent, grim story. Eli exhaled through his nose, slow and tired. He didn't need the context. He'd seen enough homes that hurt, enough soldiers who came from them. He placed the notebook gently on the table and looked to Max. The dog's ears flicked as if responding to some silent signal. "Yeah," Eli said softly, "I think we've got ourselves a storm survivor." Lily stirred hours later. The sky outside had shifted to a flat, gunmetal gray, the snow finally losing its fury. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking up at the ceiling, then rolled her head and saw Max first. The dog lifted his head slightly, tail thudding once against the wooden floor. Lily stared at him, expression unreadable. Then she looked at Eli. "You're not a police," she murmured, voice hoarse. "No," Eli said gently. "Name's Eli. This is Max. He found you." She didn't respond. She reached for the blanket around her shoulders and pulled it tighter. "You're safe here," Eli added. "No one's coming. You're not in trouble." Lily sat up slowly. Her movements were stiff, like her limbs weren't fully under command yet. Her hands trembled as she reached for the notebook. Eli passed it to her without a word. She held it close to her chest. "Did you read it?" "I did," he answered. "I thought you were dying. I wanted to understand." Lily didn't speak again, but she didn't run either. Later that day, Eli brought her warm broth, homemade chicken from his freezer, heated with herbs and a pinch of pepper. She sat at the small table, Max by her feet, Eli across from her but not too close. She ate slowly, almost mechanically, as if not sure when the food might disappear. Afterward, she asked, "Can I stay tonight?" "You can stay as long as you need." She looked down. "They might look for me." "Do you want them to find you?" She didn't answer. That night, Eli made up the cot in the spare room. The cabin had 2 bedrooms, one barely used. He placed an extra heater near the bed and stacked extra blankets, just in case. But when he woke at 3 a.m. from a half-dream, half-memory of gunfire and sand, he found Max gone from his usual place at the foot of the bed. Eli stepped quietly down the hall. Max was there, sprawled across the floor just outside Lily's door, head between his paws, tail still, like he had taken up watch. The next morning, as snowflakes drifted like ash outside, Lily sat by the fireplace with Max's head on her lap. She still hadn't said much, but Eli noticed how she rested her hand on Max's fur, like she was anchoring herself. The television remained off. No sound but the fire and the occasional creak of wood. Eli sat on the stairs, coffee in hand, wondering what Grace would have done. By afternoon, someone knocked at the cabin door. It was Sarah, the only neighbor within a half-mile radius. In her mid-50s, Sarah Dunham was tall and wiry, with a kind face lined by years of wind and sun. Her gray blonde hair was always tied in a high knot, and her clothes were thick flannel and denim, all function. She'd lived alone since her husband passed, and though she wasn't nosy, she paid attention. When she saw Eli at the door with a girl behind him, she raised an eyebrow but didn't ask. "Brought some of my soup. Figured the storm knocked out your supplies," she said. Her voice was low, dry, and reassuring. Eli thanked her, accepted the container, and stepped outside briefly to talk. She glanced toward Lily, then at Max. "She okay?" "She will be," Eli said. "She's not mine, but she needs a place for now." Sarah nodded once. "Then this is the best place she could have ended up." She left without pushing further. Eli watched her disappear into the trees, then turned back inside. Lily was petting Max now, whispering something into his ear. He didn't know what she said, but Max wagged his tail once, slow and sure, and Eli, for the first time in weeks, felt something like peace. The storm had passed, but the cold remained like an unwelcome houseguest, settling deep into the earth and bones. Outside, the landscape was glassy and white, icicles hanging like fangs from every eave. The world looked peaceful, but inside the cabin, a quiet storm was just beginning to stir. Lily sat at the small wooden table in the corner, her thin legs swinging above the floor as she scribbled something into her notebook. The flames in the fireplace danced softly, their crackle the only sound besides the scratching of pencil on paper. Max lay sprawled under the table, his head resting on one paw, his eyes trained upward, watching, waiting. Eli stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee into a tin mug, his other hand rubbing the back of his neck. Sleep hadn't come easily, not with questions pounding against the walls of his mind. He glanced again at the girl, then at the photograph on the mantel, a younger Grace, arms around her teenage brother, both smiling awkwardly in a backyard somewhere far from here. The resemblance between Lily and Grace wasn't subtle. Same jawline, same gaze that saw too much and said too little. "Lily," he said finally, voice even, "can I ask you something?" She didn't look up, but she nodded. "Your mom, what was her name?" The pencil stopped, her shoulders tensed. "Grace," she whispered. "Grace Dawson." Eli's heart caught. The mug in his hand trembled slightly before he set it down. "She was my sister," he said slowly. "My name's Eli Turner. He paused, then added, "your uncle." Lily looked up. Her eyes didn't widen. No gasp, no shock. Just a long, steady gaze. Then she nodded once, almost like she already knew. "She talked about you," she said, voice thin. "She had a photo of you and her. She kept it in her coat. Said one day we'd come find you when it was safe." Eli's jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists at his sides. He had spent the last decade telling himself he couldn't have changed anything, that Grace leaving had been her choice, her consequence. But now, face to face with the child she left behind, all those excuses felt hollow. "Why didn't she?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Lily looked back at her notebook. "She got sick," she said, "coughed all the time. Then she stopped getting up. Then she was gone." Eli sank into the chair opposite her, the wood creaking beneath his weight. Max shifted slightly, raising his head to place it gently on Lily's foot. The gesture made her flinch at first, then relax. "Where were you living then?" he asked. "With Tracy and Martin," she said. And at the mention of those names, Max's ears twitched and a low growl vibrated in his chest. Eli didn't miss it. "Tracy," he repeated. "Your stepmother?" Lily nodded. "She didn't like me. Said I was the mess Grace left behind." Her voice wavered, and Eli noticed how her hands tightened around the pencil. "She said I was too quiet, too weird, that I ruined things." She didn't cry. Not once. But Max stood now, walked around the table, and pressed his body against her legs. She leaned into him like she was trying not to fall apart. "She told everyone I stole Sophie's new game," Lily went on, "at her birthday. She made me clean everything while they had cake. Then she said I couldn't sleep inside anymore." Eli's fingers twitched. He stood slowly and walked toward the old secretary desk near the bookshelf. It hadn't been touched in years. Grace used to sit there, writing letters she rarely sent. He opened the top drawer and began rifling through envelopes, receipts, scribbled poems, sketches, until his fingers found one sealed in a yellowed envelope with his name written across the front in faded black ink. Eli. He sat back down at the table and opened it carefully. The paper inside was soft with age. Grace's handwriting curved in long, uncertain strokes. "Eli, if you're reading this, I probably couldn't tell you in person. I never meant for us to end like we did. You were my rock once. I know I disappointed you. But Lily, she's not a mistake. She's the one good thing I did right. If anything happens to me, and if by some grace of God this finds you, please don't let her end up lost. She deserves more than I gave her. Love, Grace." Eli read the letter twice, then pressed it flat on the table. Lily watched him, silent. "That's your mom's handwriting," he said. Lily nodded. "I used to trace the letters with my fingers. She said words have weight." Eli looked at Max, who now sat upright beside Lily, his body rigid, his ears pointed toward the door. "You knew, didn't you?" he muttered. "You picked her out of that storm like you were looking for someone, like you could smell her blood." Max barked once, deep and sharp, then went still again. Eli stood and walked to the bookshelf, pulling out a photo album. Inside were old pictures, birthday parties, summers at the lake, snapshots of Grace in her denim jacket with her hands on her hips like she ran the world. He turned to one photo near the back, Grace holding a newborn. A faint hospital bracelet clung to her wrist. "She never told us," Eli said softly. "Not Mom, not Dad, not me. She just left." "They didn't want me," Lily said. Not bitter, just factual. Eli turned back to her. "That's not true." She tilted her head. "Then why did they call me a burden?" Eli didn't answer. That night, after Lily had gone to bed and Max had resumed his post outside her door, Eli sat by the fireplace holding Grace's letter in one hand and the photo in the other. He stared into the flames, his face carved in shadow. In the corner of the room, the old clock chimed twice. Outside, snow began falling again. Soft, slow, gentle this time. Eli looked toward the hallway where Max was keeping watch and said quietly to himself, "We're not going to lose her too." The snowfall had settled into a lazy drift, drifting like ashes from a dying fire across the hills and rooftops of Fairbend. The cabin, now glowing with life, stood out like a warm breath in a frozen world. Eli paced near the front window, arms crossed, jaw tight. Outside, tire tracks cut through the snow, stopping just before his porch. A government-issue SUV, silver and sterile, sat humming quietly, steam rising from its hood. Inside the house, Lily sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, cupping a mug of warm milk. Max lay beside her, his head across her lap, and every so often his tail thudded once, a silent reassurance. Two figures had emerged from the SUV 10 minutes earlier. Eli had seen them through the window, watched as they stood by the car, organizing papers, exchanging words too quiet to hear. Now, footsteps crunched up the front steps. There was a knock, measured, professional. Eli opened the door. The first was a woman in her early 40s, bundled in a forest green wool coat and dark slacks. Her name was Danielle Ramos, a senior social worker from the Regional Child Protective Services office. She was tall and poised, with cocoa-colored skin, short-cropped natural hair, and gold-rimmed glasses that gave her an air of quiet authority. Her tone when she spoke was crisp but not unkind. "Mr. Turner, I'm Danielle Ramos. Thank you for calling." Behind her stood a man, pale, stocky, balding slightly, with a neat gray mustache and a clipboard clutched to his chest. This was Officer Ray Milner, the CPS liaison from the Sheriff's Department. His uniform was clean and pressed, his boots immaculate, and his eyes tired like a man who'd seen too many failed homes. He nodded, but didn't smile. Eli stepped aside. "Come in." They entered, shaking snow from their shoulders. Danielle immediately scanned the room, eyes flicking over the fireplace, the furniture, Lily, and finally Max. She gave a small pause at the sight of the dog, but nodded in approval at his calm demeanor. Lily shrank slightly as they approached, her shoulders stiffening, but Max didn't move. His eyes, sharp and unblinking, followed every step Danielle took. "I understand this is Lily Dawson," Danielle said gently, crouching so she wasn't towering over the child. "Is that right, sweetheart?" Lily nodded once. She didn't speak. She reached for her notebook. "We won't stay long," Danielle assured her. "We just want to understand what's going on. I read the report you sent, Mr. Turner. It's concerning." Eli handed her a manila folder he'd prepared, copies of Grace's letter, Lily's drawings, and a photo of Grace holding an infant Lily outside a clinic in Billings. Danielle took it, skimming through with professional efficiency. "Do you know where her guardians are now?" Officer Milner asked. "They live in town. Tracy and Martin Miller." Milner made a note. Danielle stood and straightened her coat. "We'll need to speak with them." An hour later, the living room had changed. Lily had retreated to the hall, just behind the archway, half hidden in shadow. Max remained with her, positioned like a soldier guarding a post. Across from Eli, Tracy Miller stood with her arms crossed, lips pressed tight in manufactured concern. She was a woman in her late 30s, dressed sharply in a cream turtleneck and tailored coat, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail. Her face, under makeup and effort, was smooth and controlled, but there was something hard around the eyes, a sharpness honed by years of masking resentment. Beside her stood Martin Miller, a nondescript man in his 40s, with a receding hairline and deep lines around his mouth. He wore a navy windbreaker, scuffed boots, and the look of someone who had mastered the art of avoidance. Tracy started first. "Lily ran away," she said firmly. "This whole thing is a misunderstanding. She's troubled, withdrawn. We've tried everything, counseling, extra attention. She just doesn't respond. And now this." Martin nodded slowly but said nothing. His hands remained jammed in his coat pockets. "She stole from our daughter a very expensive electronic game," Tracy continued. "We found it under her mattress. Then she disappeared that night. We were worried sick." Max growled. It was low but unmistakable. The room fell silent. Tracy's face froze. Danielle turned toward the hallway. "Lily?" she called gently. "Would you like to say anything?" There was a pause. Then Lily stepped out, still clutching her notebook. She walked slowly until she reached Max, kneeling beside him, placing one hand on his neck. "I didn't take it," she said quietly. "Sophie put it there. Her mom told her to." Tracy took a breath as if to interrupt, but Danielle raised a hand. "Let her speak!" Lily's voice shook. "They made me sleep in the laundry room. I wasn't allowed to eat with them. If I spilled anything, I had to skip meals. I didn't go to Ava's party because I wasn't clean enough." Danielle glanced at Officer Milner, who was scribbling notes furiously. "I slept on a mat next to the freezer," Lily added, looking down. "Sometimes they forgot I was there." Eli stepped forward, passing Danielle one last document, a written testimony from Mrs. Clara Hewitt, a retired school teacher who lived 2 houses down from the Millers. Clara, a silver-haired widow in her 70s, had called earlier that week after seeing Lily's face on a bulletin. Her note was brief but damning. "I saw that girl outside in the snow with no coat more than once. I offered her hot chocolate once, and Tracy told me to mind my own business. That girl was scared." Danielle folded the letter and placed it in her folder. "Do you have anything else to say, Mrs. Miller?" she asked. Tracy's voice cracked. "We were doing our best. She's not our daughter. We didn't sign up for this kind of burden." Max barked. Once, sharp, loud, final. Lily flinched. But then she smiled. Not at the bark, but at the sound of it, like a line had been drawn in the snow. Danielle sighed and closed her folder. "I'll be filing an emergency petition for protective custody," she said. "Effective immediately, Lily will remain under Mr. Turner's care while we investigate further. If needed, we'll escalate to family court." Tracy's mouth opened, then closed. Martin looked at his feet. No one tried to stop it. As they left, Danielle knelt once more beside Lily. "Would you be okay staying here for a while?" she asked. Lily nodded. "Max is here." Danielle smiled. "That's a very good reason." Snow still lined the edges of the courthouse steps, like old bones left behind by winter. The sky above Fairbend was a pale, stubborn gray, the kind that held on to cold, even when the sun tried to break through. Inside the narrow municipal building, the old radiator hissed quietly, fighting a losing battle against the draft seeping through the windows. The courtroom was modest, oak benches worn smooth by decades of small-town grievances, a judge's bench that stood slightly crooked on its platform, and fluorescent lights that hummed overhead with a fatigue of their own. Eli sat upright in a freshly pressed navy blazer, the same one he wore for his sister's funeral. His shoulders filled the frame, his jaw freshly shaved, though the hard lines of his face and the tightness in his eyes betrayed how little sleep he'd had. His right arm remained stiff at the shoulder, still recovering from shrapnel repair, and he shifted it only when necessary. Max lay on the floor beside him, his thick fur brushed out and collar gleaming. The German shepherd sat calm but alert, his amber eyes trained on the door like a soldier waiting for orders. Lily sat next to Eli on the polished bench, her legs swinging slightly, dressed in a navy coat and corduroy pants that Sarah had mended for her the night before. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid, her pale face composed, but still bearing the faint bruise of old fear. The small spiral notebook rested in her lap, fingers curled tightly around its edge. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but when she walked into the courtroom, and Max had followed without leash or hesitation, she whispered, "He's better than a lawyer anyway." Judge Elaine Hart presided over the hearing. In her early 50s, Judge Hart had the poise of a woman who had survived years in a male-dominated courtroom without ever raising her voice. Her auburn hair was cut to shoulder length, practical and neat. Her expression was firm, not cold, and her pale blue eyes scanned the room with the precision of someone who missed nothing. She wore a deep burgundy robe instead of the standard black, a subtle rebellion against tradition that no one dared question anymore. "Court is now in session for the matter of temporary custody regarding minor Lily Dawson," she announced, voice even and unwavering. Tracy and Martin sat opposite the room. Tracy wore a tailored navy coat, a silk scarf knotted tightly at her throat, and dark lipstick that exaggerated the tension in her expression. She sat stiffly, chin slightly raised, jaw clenched. Martin, on the other hand, looked as if he would rather be anywhere else. He was dressed casually in a gray pullover and khakis. his eyes darting from corner to corner like a man waiting for the fire alarm. The first part of the hearing moved quickly. Statements, introductions, legal formalities. Then came Eli's submission. A certified DNA test from the state lab in Missoula, confirming a 99.9% likelihood that he was Lily's maternal uncle. Along with it, a notarized copy of Grace's letter, photos of her with Lily, and an affidavit from neighbor Mrs. Clara Hewitt regarding Lily's mistreatment. Judge Hart reviewed the documents without expression, but made steady notes in her ledger. Then came the part that everyone dreaded. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Hart said, lifting her gaze, "you have stated under oath that Lily Dawson has behavioral problems and was caught stealing from your daughter. Do you still maintain this claim?" Tracy adjusted her scarf and leaned forward. "Yes, Your Honor. The item in question, a handheld gaming device, was found hidden in Lily's belongings. She'd been acting out for weeks prior. Disrespectful, withdrawn, sneaky." Judge Hart nodded. "Understood. Is your daughter Sophie present?" "Yes," Tracy said, eyes flicking toward the door. A bailiff brought Sophie in. The girl was small, with long blonde hair tied in matching ribbons. She wore a velvet dress too formal for a court appearance, and her expression teetered between confusion and dread. She was only 7, but her eyes flicked nervously between her parents and the judge, with the wariness of someone used to being coached. Judge Hart leaned slightly forward. "Sophie, I'd like you to tell me, in your own words, what happened with the toy. No one will be angry, I promise." Sophie looked at her mother. Tracy gave her a tight, warning smile, but Sophie looked down, then up at Max, who had lifted his head, and Lily, who was watching her silently, her arms wrapped tightly around her notebook. "I lied," Sophie whispered. The room froze. "I put the toy in Lily's blanket. Mommy told me to," she added, her voice barely audible. "She said Lily was taking too much space." Tracy's mouth opened in a silent gasp. "Sophie," Martin began, but Judge Hart raised her hand sharply. The silence was broken only by the clicking of her pen as she made another note. "Thank you, Sophie. You may return to the hallway." The girl left quickly, her small heels tapping against the tile. Tracy rose suddenly, voice raised. "She doesn't know what she's saying. She's just a child. She's been under stress. This whole thing has been traumatic for all of us." Max stood. No bark, no growl. Just the quiet, deliberate rise to full height. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lily and Tracy with the grace of a seasoned guardian. His gaze locked on the woman's face. Not threatening, but unmovable. Tracy froze. Judge Hart raised a brow. Apparently not everyone finds her presence so threatening. The courtroom breathed again. Lily spoke then, softly but clearly. "I don't want anything," she said. "Not toys or clothes or cake. I just want to live with Max." Her voice broke slightly. "He doesn't yell, he doesn't lie, and he stays." Eli closed his eyes for a moment. Judge Hart looked down, exhaled slowly, then addressed the room. "This court acknowledges the credible evidence of neglect and emotional abuse. With the confirmed familial tie between Mr. Turner and the minor, and in light of Sophie Miller's testimony, I will issue a provisional order placing Lily Dawson in the care of Eli Turner pending further investigation." Tracy looked like she had swallowed ice. Martin didn't move. Judge Hart closed the file. "Let the record show that sometimes the most loyal witness doesn't need to speak at all." The days that followed the hearing unfolded like a thaw. Slow, uncertain, but quietly transformative. Winter still ruled outside, but inside the cabin, warmth now came from more than firewood. There was a rhythm returning to the walls. Footsteps in the morning, laughter in the kitchen, the creak of old floors under the weight of something like peace. And always Max's quiet panting nearby, as if he was the heartbeat of the home. Lily had stopped flinching when the kettle hissed, or when Eli raised his voice to call from another room. She now moved with measured confidence, her eyes not scanning doorways, but lingering on the spines of books, on the window panes iced with frost, and on Max, especially on Max. He followed her everywhere. Even now, as the sun cracked over the mountain ridge, Lily was out in the backyard in thick winter boots, her coat zipped all the way up, a knitted hat tugged over her ears. She trudged through the snow, occasionally glancing back. Max, a few paces behind, limped slightly through the drifts. His gait had slowed in recent weeks, his joints stiffened by arthritis that Eli had once chalked up to just winter stiffness. But Max didn't complain. He never did. Each morning when Lily grabbed her coat, Max would rise, stretch carefully, and follow with unwavering determination. This morning, Lily paused beside the old pine at the edge of the property, a place where snow built up in soft humps like sleeping beasts. She looked up at the tree, then down at Max, who sat with a groan and rested his head on her boot. Her mittened hand reached down and stroked between his ears. "You always come," she whispered. He wagged his tail once. Inside, Eli watched from the kitchen window. He held a mug of coffee in one hand, his other rubbing the scar tissue beneath his collarbone. He had noticed Max's increasing stiffness, the hesitation when getting upstairs, the way he sometimes waited at the bottom until Eli came to lift his front legs. Eli hadn't said anything to Lily yet. She had only just begun to smile again. There was no need to place another weight on her. He set his coffee down and stepped into the small storage room off the kitchen. It was dusty, filled with hunting gear he no longer used, a snowblower that hadn't worked in 2 years, and old wood planks. He began sorting through, pulling out what he needed. That afternoon he built a ramp. Not a fancy one, just a sturdy, wide board lined with gripped traction strips and a wooden frame that led from the porch to the snowy yard. By the time Lily and Max came inside, both red-cheeked and soaked from the knees down, the ramp was in place. "For Max," Eli said simply. Lily looked at it, then at him. "So he doesn't have to jump?" "He's not as springy as he used to be." She knelt and hugged Max tightly. "You're still my best boy." That evening after dinner, grilled cheese and tomato soup, which Lily declared was the fanciest thing ever, they gathered by the fire. Max lay curled at Lily's feet, his nose resting on the blanket, eyes half-lidded. Eli sat in his armchair, a paperback open but unread. Lily was flipping through a book of poetry, her finger tracing the lines like she was learning a new language. "Eli?" she asked suddenly. "Yeah?" "What did Grace like to read?" He looked at her, surprised by the question, then smiled. "She loved ghost stories, scary ones, the kind with creaky stairs and wind blowing through the window, even when it's shut." Lily giggled. "She didn't get scared? She said she liked the thrill, said it made her feel alive." Lily nodded, thoughtful. "Can I read one?" He got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled down a dog-eared volume with a cracked leather spine. He handed it to her and watched as she settled cross-legged beside Max, opening the book carefully as if it were something sacred. As she read, her lips moving in silent rhythm, Eli caught a glance of something he hadn't seen in a long time. Peace. Not the absence of noise, but the kind of stillness that comes when a soul feels safe. That night, as snow fell in thin silver threads outside, Eli passed by Lily's door and peeked in. The room was warm, dimly lit by the small lamp on the nightstand. She was already asleep, her notebook by her side, her arm draped over Max like a child holding on to her most treasured toy. Max looked up as Eli entered, blinked slowly, then let his eyes drift shut again. His breathing was steady, but slower than it once had been. Eli crouched, brushing his hand gently over the dog's fur. "You did good, old man," he whispered. "You did real good." The next morning, Eli found Lily at the kitchen table, a small drawing in front of her. It was Max, standing at attention, with a little girl beside him and mountains in the background. Above them were the words, "My first friend." Eli didn't say anything. He just poured her a glass of orange juice and sat beside her in silence. Later that week, Sarah stopped by. She brought muffins. She always brought something. Today it was blueberry, still warm, packed in a reusable cloth bag with a red ribbon tied around the handle. "Thought you could use something sweet," she said, brushing snow off her coat. Sarah was tall and slender, with wind-chapped cheeks and soft gray eyes that missed little. She had a quiet way of entering a room like she'd always belonged there. Her laugh lines were deep but kind, and she wore her age like a badge of competence. "Lily around?" she asked. "She's in the yard with Max." Sarah glanced out the window. "He's slowing down." "I know. You gonna tell her?" Eli shook his head. "Not yet." Sarah placed the muffins on the counter. "When you do, be gentle. She's patching herself up, but the stitches aren't tight yet." "I will." Sarah left a kiss on Lily's forehead before she left and gave Max a long, lingering rub behind the ears. "You're a good dog," she whispered. "Don't worry, she's got people now." The snow had softened that week, blanketing the pines in velvet white. It no longer came down in blizzards or howling storms. It drifted, slow and hushed, like nature exhaling. Inside the cabin, the air had taken on the steady rhythm of a life cautiously finding its shape. Lily's quiet humming in the mornings, the scrape of Max's nails on the wooden floor, and the scent of old books and herbal tea floating under the low wooden beams. Eli moved through the house with a stiffness that came not only from his shoulder, but from the weight of things he hadn't yet dared to feel. That day, while cleaning out an old drawer in Grace's room, now Lily's, he stumbled on a small black object, no larger than his palm, dusty, forgotten. It was a voice recorder, an old-school, pocket-sized model, one Grace used to carry during her brief stint freelancing for a local radio station. He hadn't seen it in years. Curious, Eli wiped off the dust and clicked play. There was static, then a rustle, then Grace's voice, tired but soft, her breath a whisper. "I don't know who'll ever hear this. Maybe no one. Maybe I'll toss this in the drawer and forget it. But I just needed to talk. To Lily, my Lily." Eli froze. The room tilted slightly around him. The voice in the recorder wasn't the fierce Grace he remembered. It was a mother, threadbare with guilt, worn thin from love unreturned. "You're sleeping next to me. We have no heat. You keep kicking your blanket off, and I keep pulling it back. You smile in your sleep. I think you'll be okay. Someday someone will see you for what you are. Not a burden, not a secret. Just a little girl who hums when she draws and holds crackers out for birds even when you know they won't come. I wish I'd been brave enough to bring you back to Montana, but they made it clear they didn't want you. Not really, not after what happened. And maybe I was a coward, but maybe your uncle will be stronger than me. If this ever gets to him, Eli, I'm sorry, but please, if she finds you, don't make her apologize for existing. Just let her be." The recorder clicked off. Eli sat there for a long time, the silence pressing around him. The world didn't shift. No thunder, no drama. Just a quiet ache deep inside his chest, like something old had finally broken loose. He took the recorder and walked to the living room, where Lily sat curled up with Max near the fireplace, her legs tucked under her like a cat. She was reading aloud softly to him from a battered children's book, her voice slightly raspy from the dry air. Max blinked slowly, ears twitching with every rise and fall of her voice. "Lily," Eli said, kneeling beside her, holding out the recorder. "I found something of your mom's. I think she left it for us." Lily took it gently. When she pressed play, she barely breathed. Her small hands trembled as Grace's voice filled the room once more. When the message ended, Lily didn't cry. She looked at Max, then up at Eli. "She thought I smiled in my sleep," she whispered. She was right. That night, snow began to fall again, fine and steady, the kind that whispered secrets across rooftops and lingered on windowsills. Eli stayed up later than usual, writing the first draft of a petition for full custody. No more waiting, no more limbo. Grace had wanted safety for her daughter. He would give it to her, not as an obligation, but as a promise. In the early hours of the morning, a sharp sound jolted him awake. It wasn't a bark, it was a thump. Eli sprang from bed, adrenaline sharp. He found Lily kneeling by the front hallway, still in her pajamas, arms wrapped around Max. The dog was on his side, unmoving at first glance. One of his hind legs twitched faintly, but the rest of him was still. "Max won't wake up," Lily whispered. "He was trying to follow me to the bathroom, and he just fell." Her eyes were wild, panicked. Eli knelt, his hands moving fast but gentle, checking for breath, pulse. Max's body was cold, much colder than normal. His breathing was shallow, labored. "We need to get him warm," Eli said. "Get blankets." Lily ran and returned with two, dragging them across the floor. They wrapped Max tightly, Lily pressing her cheek to his fur, murmuring over and over, "Don't go, Max, don't go." The minutes crawled by. Eli turned the thermostat up, brought a space heater over, and sat on the floor beside them. Time lost meaning. Lily never moved, Her arms stayed around Max's neck, as if holding him in place would anchor him to life. Dawn seeped into the cabin in pale pinks and grays. The fire had burned low, but the room was warm with something stronger than heat. Then, slowly, Max shifted. Not much. Just a twitch of his paw, a sigh through his nostrils. His tail thumped once. "He's okay," Lily gasped. "He's still here." Eli exhaled for the first time in hours. Yeah, he is." Lily looked at Max and whispered, "You're not allowed to leave yet." Max, groggy but awake, blinked at her. And in that moment, something passed between them that Eli could never name, only witness. A bond beyond explanation, beyond language. That afternoon, after the vet made a home visit and confirmed Max's collapse was likely due to cold stress and overexertion from his arthritis, Lily curled beside him again, stroking his ears. "He saved me in the snow," she whispered. "Now I'll save him." Eli said nothing. He simply reached for his phone and called Danielle. "It's time," he told her. "I want to make it permanent. She's home now. We're home." The courtroom smelled faintly of pine cleaner and winter coats soaked through with melting snow. Outside, the world was still white, trees skeletal, streets quiet. But in that little room with its mahogany benches and the state seal carved above the judge's chair, warmth pulsed like a heartbeat ready to be reborn. Lily sat beside Eli, her boots barely reaching the floor, her legs swinging slightly as if her body couldn't quite hold still under the weight of what this day meant. She wore a soft blue sweater Sarah had knitted, thick yarn, slightly oversized, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hair had grown since she arrived, and now it hung just past her shoulders in soft brown waves. A small braid tucked to one side held back wisps from her eyes. In her lap she clutched a small stuffed bear missing one button eye and smelling faintly of cedar, her last belonging from her birth home. Max, cleaned and brushed, lay curled at her feet. He no longer moved with the same spring, but his posture that morning was proud, his ears alert, his eyes watchful. As if he knew, without understanding every word, that today was not about laws or signatures, but about belonging. The judge entered with quiet authority. Judge Marion Collingsworth was a woman in her late 60s with a tidy gray bun, deep lines across her brow, and eyes that could melt or pierce depending on the truth they were offered. She wore glasses on a chain and a wedding ring, though no one had seen her husband in years. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but never uncertain. "Let's begin," she said, folding her hands on the bench. Eli stood. In his pressed navy blue shirt and weathered khakis, he looked every bit the soldier trying to relearn softness. His jaw was clean-shaven, his dark hair neatly combed, but there was always a shadow in his eyes. PTSD didn't leave a man untouched, only managed. Still, that morning, Eli's voice didn't shake. He submitted the final papers, full custody petition, letters from counselors, character references from Sarah and the school's principal, and a copy of Grace's voice recording. Then, as if it were nothing, he handed over a birth certificate, newly issued, freshly inked. Lily Grace Turner. The judge adjusted her glasses, read in silence for a few moments, and then looked up. "Miss Lily," she said, voice warming, "do you understand what's happening today?" Lily nodded. "I think so." "Would you like to say anything?" Lily looked to Eli, then down at Max. She took a breath. I don't want to go anywhere else. I don't want to be moved again. I'm not trouble. I just needed someone to find me. Max did. Then Eli did. And now, I don't feel scared anymore." The judge's gaze held hers a moment longer before she smiled. "Thank you, dear." Then, softly, firmly, the gavel fell. Custody is awarded to Eli Turner. The name Lily Grace Turner is hereby recognized by the state of Montana. This court session is concluded. It was done. Outside, the snow had started again, but it didn't feel like a wait anymore. It felt like celebration. The cabin changed after that, not in structure, but in soul. Lily's drawings filled the fridge. Max's bed was now double padded and closer to the fire. Sarah came by more often, sometimes with casseroles, sometimes with books, always with that grounded smile that said, "You're not alone." And Eli laughed more, not often, not loud, but real. And then came the day Lily asked, "What if we made a place where kids like me could go when no one listens?" Eli blinked. "Like a home?" like a place where Max would go if he were a person. The idea grew quietly, like frost tracing a window. With Sarah's help and a few local volunteers, they converted the old ranger outpost down the hill into something new. It had once been a depot, then abandoned. Its windows broken, floors warped. But they painted it soft yellow, repaired the roof, furnished it with warmth, color, books, bunk beds. They named it Max's Shelter. Above the front door, painted in Lily's careful hand, were the words, "Here, every child is found before it's too late." Local businesses donated clothes. A retired teacher offered to tutor. The mayor even showed up one afternoon with blankets and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. But it was a start. The cabin remained their home, but the shelter became their purpose. Max, of course, was honorary guardian. He greeted each child like they were long-lost friends. Even as his steps slowed and his naps grew longer, he never missed a morning walk or the sound of a child's sob. He'd nudge their knees gently, rest his head on their laps, say, in his way, "You're seen." One late spring evening, as the last snow melted into mud and the mountains turned green again, Lily sat beside Max on the front porch. The air smelled like earth and rain. She wore a yellow sundress over jeans, her feet bare, her arms long now. She was growing fast. Max lay beside her, his fur thinned with age, his breaths deep and tired but steady. Lily rested a hand on his back. "You found me first, Max," she said, voice soft. "I'll never forget." He thumped his tail once, the smallest of gestures. But it was enough. Because some beginnings don't need fireworks. Some just need a whisper in the snow, and someone who chooses to listen. Sometimes, God doesn't send angels with wings. Sometimes, He sends an old dog with tired paws, a soldier with a scarred heart, and a whisper in the snow. And from that, something sacred is born, not in thunder, but in quiet warmth, in second chances, in children who finally sleep without fear. Maybe the real miracles aren't sudden or loud. Maybe they come softly, through fur and frost, and the kind of love that refuses to leave. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to share it with someone who still believes in quiet miracles. Comment below with the name of a dog, a person, or a moment that changed your life. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story where love rises from brokenness. May the Lord bless you, protect you, and remind you that sometimes, even in the coldest winter, He sends help in fur and four paws.